All right, happy Monday. This week we're going to look at one of the most important events in world history, really. It's called the Columbian Exchange, and it's a result of this age of exploration. So the name Columbian comes from Christopher Columbus, and this exchange is an exchange of plants, animals, and ideas from the old world to the new world, and from the new world to the old world. So between North and South America, and between Africa, Europe, and Asia. Okay, so today there's not going to be anything written. I just want you to watch this slideshow. It's not going to take too long, but a quick overview of what does this Columbian Exchange really mean, and get your mind wrapped around this. It's really, along with like the invention of the printing press, maybe the computer, one of those world-changing events that maybe the most important thing that has ever happened in the planet. When we study history, world history, before, world history has usually been about a place. We studied Japan or Africa. We studied a place within Africa. We studied medieval Europe, always focusing on a place. When we study this Columbian Exchange, it starts to be studying world history. What happens in one place affects another place. They become tied in their economies, and diseases, population transfers, all sorts of things become connected. So all the different places we've studied this year all of a sudden become part of one whole global community in one way or another. So let's take a look at this PowerPoint. The Columbian Exchange. So what do we have here? The big idea is the Columbian Exchange was an exchange of plants, animals, ideas, and technology between the old world and the new world. Brought many changes all over the world. The main ideas, we've got plants and animals exchanged between Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. And this part's fascinating. There are all sorts of animals that just did not exist in North and South America that today we can't even wrap our brains around imagining a world that didn't have those. Same in Europe. They didn't have certain foods or plants, animals, things like that, that after this exchange, all of a sudden, they move. And they become associated with places like Italy. Italy never had a tomato before the Columbian Exchange. Think about that. Italian food is very much connected with like a red pasta sauce or something like that. Never happened before the Columbian Exchange, right? Nobody in ancient Rome had ever heard of a tomato. That was from the New World. Same as chocolate and other things too. And then culture and technology changed as ideas were exchanged between Europe and the Americas. And finally, society and the economy changed in Europe and the Americas. So let's take a look a little more at those. So main idea number one, the plants and animals that were exchanged from the old world, Africa, Europe, and Asia, to the New World, North America and South America. So the European explorers set out to find these new trade routes, but discovering the new lands had so many effects they couldn't have anticipated. One of which was they found all sorts of new animals in the New World they didn't know existed, and they brought over animals that the New World had never seen before. When we studied the Aztecs, we saw how the Spanish brought horses. There were no horses in the New World before the Europeans arrived. Maybe prehistoric times they had gone extinct, but the idea of Native Americans and the culture on the plains, hunting buffalo and so on with horses, that came after at least hunting them using horses, came after the Spanish arrived with the horses. All right, so the exchange of plants, animals, and ideas, that's the Columbian Exchange. It occurred when the Europeans took seeds and crops to the New World. And then, just as importantly, accidental exchanges took place when Europeans brought over diseases, which is one of the real tragedies of this. And then other things like rats that hid on the ships, earthworms. The New World did not have as many earthworms and things like that. They were brought over in the ships, and that changed the landscape of the New World. So plants, We'll get more into specifics as we go this week about what kind of plants were brought over. Just kind of skip through that. Same thing for animals. Think like cows. There were no cows in the New World as domesticated animals, along with no horses. So the food items that go along with cows, besides beef, you've got like your dairy products, cheese, and so on. That wasn't coming from cows in the New World. Let's see. So if we took a look at a person's diet today, you would see a large percentage of the diet is both from New World foods and Old World foods, right? If you're thinking of like some kind of American barbecue, if you had a hamburger on a bun and it's corn on the cob and so on, the corn is a New World food. The beef is an Old World food. Tomatoes are a New World food. The wheat for the bun and so on is an Old World food. A real combination. These things didn't exist in the other continents before the Age of Exploration and the Columbian Exchange. So one of the big tragedies, though, is there were a lot of things brought over with unintended consequences. We learned about consequences. You had intentional and unintentional. Well, diseases, we saw the diseases that the Native Americans did not have immunities to, that killed, they say, between 50 and 90% of the people that were living here before Columbus arrived. The population declined by up to 90% in the 100 years after the Europeans arrived. And that was because they had no immunities to these diseases. And they weakened the communities before the Spanish actually conquered them, right? The Incas and the Aztecs, they were damaged before the Spanish actually arrived by their diseases preceding them. Made them easier to conquer. Other things, while the Europeans introduced plants and animals, they found things they also didn't know about. We talked about the tomato and the potato and squash, tobacco, chocolate. Tobacco and chocolate did not exist in the New World. Nobody in Europe had been smoking tobacco. Nobody in ancient Rome or any of those places had ever had chocolate before. That was a big Aztec thing and so on. Let's see. Got things like pumpkins and tomatoes, pineapples being brought to the Old World from the New World. Next up, we've got a change in culture and technology. So some of the big things that came with the culture were language and religion. Think of the big religions in the New World today, North and South America. We've got like Christianity, Catholicism being the big form in Mexico and South America, brought by the Spanish, right? That didn't exist, obviously, in the New World before it was brought over. And then languages. North and South America, people are speaking Spanish, English, many other languages now, but the original primary languages are from people, this cultural exchange from Europe being brought over. All right, and then we've got the religion. We talked about the missionaries in the Catholic Reformation. You did your mission reports. This is the time period when those missions would be getting set up, spreading the religion to the New World. Christians were set to convert people to new lands, their religion. You saw all the missions in California, Mexico, and so on. And then this also brings up one of the other big tragedies, besides the diseases killing the Native Americans, was the introduction of slavery to the New World. And that comes with these new crops that people are growing, new ways of doing farming, and this worldwide exchange. We're going to get to it in a second, called the Triangle Trade. But Europeans took guns and steel to parts of Africa and to the Americas and introduced these in there. They also brought the technology of the wheel to the Americas. Obviously, the people of the Americas had a wheel like the Aztec calendar, but they didn't really use it for tools as much because they didn't have beasts of burden. There were no oxen or cows or horses here to pull carts and things like that. So the wheel was not quite used as much. But once they start bringing in animals. Here we can see. Then they can change and do different types of farming on a bigger scale when it doesn't have to be humans doing it. Also, in the Spanish, were taking a lot of gold and silver out of the mines. They were using humans to do it partly, but also using animals to carry the things. You've got new industries making textiles. And we're going to see the sugarcane plantations. Growing sugar, this is a big new kind of the revolution of sugar is a whole story in itself. But a plantation is a giant farm. And they were growing the sugarcane on the farms, making large amounts of money. The Native American people were dying from the diseases, so they decided to start importing African slaves to do this work instead of the native people. And that's going to be a tragedy we're going to read about in a second here and learn about throughout the rest of this time in 8th grade too. But that starts to happen here as part of one of the consequences of the Columbian Exchange. So society and the economy changed as well. There were new trade networks that connected different parts of the whole world, having big impacts for European countries and their colonies, places they had taken over. The plantations and mines made Spain and Portugal some of the richest countries in the world for a little bit. And then the clergy in the Americas, like the church officials, they were trying to convert those people to Christianity. And then they realized they were also mistreating the people by making them work as slaves in the mines. So there was a guy named Bartolome de las Casas, a priest, and he wrote a letter to the king, and in the kind of twisted way of logic of this time period, he said, we're making these people into Christians. We can't use them as slaves. Which, that sounds like, hey, sounds like a nice thing. But then the flip side of that is he said, so why don't we start importing people from Africa to use as slaves instead? Which is obviously not good. But so you have this element of racism kicking in here at this time period too. Spanish colonists forced American Indians to work on the plantations, killing up to 90% of the people that lived there. And that's where this catastrophe kicks in. This is called the Triangle Trade. So the way this works, in the European countries, they manufacture products like finished goods, like weapons, textiles, like fabrics and things like that. They bring those down to Africa. They exchange the guns or the finished products for slaves. Then they take the second half of their trip to the New World, and they drop off the slaves in exchange for raw materials, which are like lumber or cotton or things like that, that are taken back to Europe and then turned into the finished goods, like say you take a piece of wood and you turn it into a bed or part of the gun, right? Into a finished product, like in some factory or some workers, and then those finished products are brought back again, sold for slaves to the New World for the raw materials. This is called the Triangle Trade. Different statistics are going to show you how many people were brought over, but we're talking upwards of 12 to more million Africans brought to the New World as slaves. Okay, so we'll learn more about that, but this is definitely one of the worst consequences of the Columbian Exchange. Columbian Exchange had lots of intended and unintended consequences, but this, all of a sudden, you've got 3 different areas bringing food, ideas, languages, religion, plants, animals. The world is now connected, and this goes with Asia as well. So we're just going to wrap this up here. The Africans did not die as a result of these diseases that the Europeans had, because Africa and Europe had been in contact for long, long periods of time. People traded and brought things back and forth. So people were exposed to the diseases, and it didn't have the same consequences. Social order in the Americas consisted of the Europeans as the upper class, the Africans and the American Indians and people that were mixed race in the lower classes. That system of basing social order on what race you are is racism. And that's the belief that some people are better than others based on racial traits like skin color. This kicks in at this time period, and you see that throughout the New World. Okay, so kind of ends on a very negative note here of consequences of this Columbian Exchange, but it has all sorts of interesting ones other than these aspects of it, like the plants and animals exchanged and so on. So that is going to take up the entire lesson for today. You don't need to do anything. I hope you made it to the end. Tomorrow we're going to take a look at the textbook and kind of go over some definitions. And on Thursday and Friday we will watch a video about this. Okay, all right. Hope you're having a great day. Talk to you later.